I never entered a cell again without hearing that voice, no matter the prison, the cell block, or the shift. Sometimes it's just a distant whisper, almost confused with the sound of my own thoughts. Other times, it comes clear, direct, right next to my ear, as if someone were alive there, calling out to me. It was just 3 words that shouldn't have existed that night. Help me, please. Since then, they echo within me in the quietest moments. It's always when the dawn weighs heavily and everything seems suspended, as if time stood still just to remind me of what happened. That cell, that damned cell, should have been empty, and it was, technically, but only technically, because something remained inside, something that never left, and maybe it never will leave me either. I can still feel the cold sweat running down my back when I remember it. The metallic smell of iron, mixed with the expired disinfectant and the mold on the walls, still makes me nauseous. I remember the flashlight trembling in my hand, the breath catching in my chest, and the absurd feeling that something was watching me, even though I was alone in the hallway. At least, that's what I thought. Memories like these are not remembered. They invade, they return without asking permission, and they always start from the same point, always pull on the same thread. That shift, that noise, that call I should never have heard. The night everything began to change. If you've made it this far, it's because you feel the same chill down your spine that I felt that night. You also carry this fascination for stories that give you goosebumps, that defy logic, that make you look twice into the dark. Here, each account is more than a story. It's a confession, a secret shared with those who understand the weight of silence and the power of an unsolved mystery. Be part of this community with us. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. There is a lot that still needs to be told. I entered the system at 22 with no life plan, just the burden of having dropped out of college, a mother tired of giving me a second chance, and a father who looked at me as if he already knew I wouldn't last long anywhere. The public service exam appeared as a temporary solution, a stable job, a monthly salary, and with luck, a few years of quiet without attracting attention. I thought, I can last 6 months. I ended up staying for 11 years. At first, everyone tries to keep their head on straight. You enter in uniform, clean, full of new instructions, with that code of conduct no one respects. You remember your first round, the first time you locked a cell and heard the sound of the key turning inside your head too. Then habit sets in. Your mind adapts if you let it. The smells, sweat, cheap disinfectant, sour with fear, sometimes dried blood, become part of the landscape. The sound of the bars slamming no longer makes you blink. Stares no longer pierce you. You learn to toughen up. You learn not to see what you shouldn't. You learn, above all, to keep quiet. I worked in 2 prisons before going to the unit where it all happened. One in the countryside, the other in a satellite city where the routine was tense but predictable. And that's how I operated. Predictability was security. I liked to make my rounds in silence, without conversation, without forming bonds with inmates, colleagues, or bosses. The less involvement, the lower the risk of getting sucked into something. That's what I repeated to myself like a mantra. But over time, distance stops being protection and becomes anesthesia. And when you're too anesthetized, you no longer feel when you're going too deep. The new prison was different. It had a maximum security wing with a bad reputation, rumors of suicides, nighttime screams, guards requesting unexplained psychological leave. Much was suppressed in the reports, but I didn't believe any of it. I only believed what was concrete. And concrete there was the routine. Shift changes, cell checks, monitoring inmates' entry and exit, surveillance during visiting hours. The basics. The rest I left to those who like to get lost in rumors. I did my job. I kept my schedule, clocked in, went home, and continued on autopilot. I'd seen a suicide cut himself with a lunchbox lid. I'd seen a prisoner kill another using the leg of a dismantled bed. I'd cleaned a cell with blood all the way to the ceiling. I'd had to restrain a naked man covered in feces, claiming the wall was talking to him. I'd heard a mother sob on conjugal visit day. I'd been spit in the face. I'd heard threats on the way out. I'd found a note written in blood, hidden inside a pillow. And all of this, I swallowed, one thing at a time, like someone learning to chew on broken glass, thinking it's part of the job. You can get used to a lot of things, but never to emptiness. The emptiness between sounds, the emptiness between people, the emptiness between thoughts. And there, in that unit, the silence had a texture. It crept like thick smoke through the hallways. A silence that didn't come from peace, but from containment, as if the walls were always holding back something that wanted to escape. My shift was night, and over time I realized that the early mornings in Block C were different. I can't explain how, but they were. And no, I'm not talking about something supernatural yet, just a feeling. Intuition, that thing we learn to ignore for fear of appearing weak. But I felt it, a kind of oppression in the air, as if walking there was like walking inside a dream where you sense something is about to happen, but you can't wake up. I kept my cool, calm, rigid. My uniform was always clean, my boots polished, my posture firm. Colleagues said I was the most calm. In other words, I was the least reactive, but inside, something had been creaking for a while, a discomfort I couldn't name, a tiredness that didn't come from my body, and the truth is, I no longer quite remembered who I was before working there. I lived alone, I ate little, I drank too much on weekends, I didn't maintain friendships or relationships. My world was prison, and within it, I was invisible. I functioned, I breathed, I walked, but I wasn't living, and I thought that was the right thing to do. That distance was a form of strength. I thought nothing could shake me anymore, until that day, until that night when Cell 23 began to breathe again. We always heard about it. It was the cell where inmate Silver hanged himself a few months before my transfer. The report said suicide, but no one stayed in that wing for long after that. There were changes of guards, psychological internment, people asking for transfers. The rumor behind the scenes was that Silver spent his last days repeating nonsense, talking to someone only he could see and begging to be let out of his cell, even after being denied. They said he screamed, cried, banged on the door, and no one answered. And then he killed himself with a piece of his own shirt, tied to the toilet pipe. That's what they said. The cell was sealed for a while. Then they reopened it, cleaned it, and put in a new mattress. But no prisoner wanted to stay there. No one would say why. They just didn't stay. Then it became a warehouse. It was empty and locked, and we walked past it like people pretending not to see what's in the corner of their eye. The night everything changed, I was on duty on patrol in Wing B, and due to a system error, I ended up having to cover part of the patrol in Block C, specifically the corridor of Cell 23. It was already past 1 in the morning. The sound of the radio on my belt was the only mechanical sound between cells. Every footstep echoed like a warning that I was too alone in there. And even with all the cells locked, with all the inmates under control, there was something uneasy. It was then that I felt it. I didn't hear it. I felt it, like a vibration on my skin, like someone had whispered just behind my neck, and the cold air had invaded my lungs before I could even turn to look. There was no one, just the hallway, and Cell 23. My flashlight failed for a split second, a tremor in my hand, shortness of breath, something on the ground, a shadow that seemed out of place, as if it had appeared there after I had already passed. The key in my pocket weighed 3 times as much. The badge on my chest rattled loudly with every step. I wanted to move on, ignore it, continue my patrol and forget about it, but I couldn't. I stood there, staring at the door to Cell 23, and for the first time in years, I hesitated. It's strange what the mind does when it senses something is wrong. It tries to rationalize. It was just a power outage. You are tired. He hasn't slept much. But the body he knows. And mine had been saying for days, don't go back there. But I went. Against instinct. Against logic. Against everything. And that's why, to this day, I wake up in the middle of the night with a dry throat, a racing heart, and that question hammering in my head. What if I hadn't stopped at that door? That night began like so many others. The kind of shift where you just expect to pass the hours like someone walking down a dark hallway with their eyes closed, counting their steps until the end. It was a little colder than usual, the kind of damp chill that doesn't come from outside, but seems to be born from the walls themselves. The old fans in Wing B groaned softly, as if trying to whisper something, and the hallway lights, those fluorescent ones that never stop vibrating, were more unstable than usual. Some flickered at intervals that didn't seem random. There was a strange cadence to them, as if they followed a beat only I couldn't understand. The sounds on that shift seemed to have been swallowed by something. There were no muffled conversations of the inmates in their cells. No metallic sounds of bed scraping, no dry coughs from the elderly who always woke in the early hours, only the soft scratching of something lightly touching the iron, a noise that came and went as if testing my senses. The smell was stronger too, and it wasn't just the usual disinfectant, the one with the piney, ever-milky scent. There was something else, something reminiscent of accumulated moisture in a sunless place, as if the concrete breathed beneath it all, as if it sweated. I walked with the log stick, strapped to my side, keeping the same pace as always. I stepped firmly, but internally I hesitated. It wasn't fear yet. It was something that predated fear, a subtle discomfort, slowly spreading like an itch in the soul. There was no practical reason for it. Everything seemed in place. All the patrol points were intact. No alerts in the system, no screams, no unusual movements. But there was too much silence. And we quickly learned that silence, in places like that, is never peace. It's pause. It's waiting. I remember leaning against the wall near Wing C for a few seconds, trying to pretend it was exhaustion, that it was just another night. But my body doesn't lie. My stomach churned for no reason, as if anticipating something. My breathing became shallow. My eyes, even trained by the darkness, took longer than usual to adjust to the dimmest part of the block. That's when I passed cell 23. It was empty. It had been empty for months, since the day Silver hanged himself. Her gate was the same as all the others, the same type of lock, the same metal structure, with rusty vertical bars at the ends. But still, something was wrong there. Always had been. It wasn't about what we saw, but about what we felt when we passed by. Something heavy in the air. As if, in that particular corner, the oxygen was different, denser, heavier. No one got too close. It was like an unspoken agreement between the guards. One avoided the situation, the other pretended not to understand. They had already suggested turning the cell into a storage locker or an isolation wall, but they decided against it. They said it was bad luck to mess with the dead space, that it was best to leave it as it was. I avoided it myself. On my last rounds, I'd pass by like someone passing a familiar grave, without looking directly at it, without taking a deep breath, with a quickened pace, just enough to appear normal. That night, however, I stopped, not out of curiosity, not out of defiance, simply because my feet stopped on their own, my body froze, and I, who had so often forced the automatic to protect myself, found myself exposed, standing there, staring at that door with goosebumps on the back of my neck, as if someone were watching me from the other side. The overhead light flickered twice and then stabilized, as if it had decided to watch with me what would come next. The hallway behind me seemed darker than before, and the sound was no sound. Nothing. No breathing. No draft. No Footsteps. Nothing but my own heart pounding in my ears. The cell was locked, I knew it. 3 locks. No inmates assigned. No recent movement. And yet I was certain, absurdly certain, that there was something in there. Not someone. Something. I placed my hand on the grate. Cold. Colder than any other surface on that block. It was like touching a piece of iron buried in ice. It was only then that I realized there was a faint handprint on the inside of the door, at chest height. A handprint made from the inside, fresh enough that it still looked damp, like freshly applied sweat. I froze. I couldn't call anyone on the radio. I couldn't move. I stood there, staring at that stain, trying to understand what it meant, trying to deny what was already obvious. The problem is, she wasn't there the previous shift. I would have noticed, I always do. And there, standing in that position, without an answer, without logic, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, desire to escape. But we don't. Run away without a reason. And I still wasn't sure what that was, yet. So I remained motionless, trying to understand if it was all in my head, or if it was just the beginning of something that should never have been reopened. I was still standing there, in front of cell 23, when the sound came. It didn't start as a scream, no. It would be easier to explain, easier to ignore, if it had been a direct scream. Something abrupt, cutting through the silence like a knife. But it wasn't. It started. As a whisper, as if someone were trying to speak, but didn't have the strength. A muffled noise, half whispered, half choked. I almost didn't hear it. Almost. I tilted my head slightly, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. The radio on my belt was silent, no movement in the other cells, no footsteps behind me. The hallway remained quiet. And then the sound came again, louder this time. Help! The word scratched the air like a lament, as if it had to pass through walls that no longer exist. It was a blunt request, I had no doubt, no confusion. It was a man's voice, desperate, calling for help. I froze. My first reaction was practical, an officer's instinct. Someone might have broken into the sealed cell, an inmate escaped from another block, someone hiding. But that impulse lasted 2 seconds. 2. Because by the third, I knew there was no logical explanation. Cell 23 was isolated, 3 locks. No direct access, no inmate authorized there, no keys outside the armory. And that voice wasn't that of someone lost. It wasn't even that of someone alive. It was that of someone taken, stuck somewhere between what we understand as life and what no one ever really explains. My hands instantly sweated. My palms felt clammy and cold, as if they'd been dipped in ice. The flashlight trembled. The sound of my heartbeat drowned out everything else for a moment. I felt the air grow heavy in my chest. Calm down. Breathe, I thought. You heard wrong. But then the voice. It came again, louder. Now it wasn't a whisper, it wasn't a lament, it was despair. "It helps me," came straight from cell 23. This time I heard it like someone being slapped. It was a full sentence, loaded, painful, a plea that pierced my skin. I took 2 steps back without realizing it. My body moved away before my mind decided, because I knew that voice. I swear by all that is holy, I knew that voice. It was hoarse, deep, a little broken, like someone who's gone days without sleep, without food, or screaming so hard they've lost their strength. But it was a voice I'd heard before, and right then, that was what chilled me the most. Silver, the inmate who hanged himself there months before. I'd made rounds 2 nights before his death. He was agitated, sitting on the edge of the mattress, eyes fixed on the floor, mumbling. As I passed, he looked up and stared straight at me, as if he'd truly seen me inside. "They won't let me sleep," that's what he said. I just replied that it was his conscience, and I left. Now that voice was there again, calling me, begging. Help, lower. Please, weaker. Part of me wanted to run, clock out, leave, disappear. Another part wanted to open that door. because as absurd as the idea was, you knew that there was someone in there. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't dreaming. I was seeing the door vibrated slightly, as if someone was leaning against the other side, breathing against the metal. But there was no shadow, no visible presence, no physical sign other than the sound. Still, I took a step forward. The key on my belt weighed like lead. The badge trembled on my chest. My hand reached for my holster, not out of caution, on impulse. And then the strangest thing happened. From the back of the cell came the sound of something dragging, as if someone were actually trying to get to the door. It was a dull, slow, labored sound, a human sound, but the cell was empty. I backed away. I pressed my back against the opposite wall. I really pressed it, as if it would protect me. My chest was rising and falling too fast, and no matter how hard I tried to focus on the practical, checking the dashboard, checking the cameras, none of it came to mind. All that existed was the cell, the sound, and that cruel question echoing in my head. What if he never left? The radio hissed on my belt. A soft hiss, no message, just static, a dull thud. And the next moment, the sound stopped. Cell 23 was completely silent. No voice, no dragging, no presence. But I knew, with every fiber of my being, that something had called me. And the worst part? I didn't know if I wanted to hear it again, or if I was hoping to never hear that voice again in my life. The first thing I remember was the weight of the flashlight in my hand. It felt denser, rougher, as if each finger was aware of its own touch. I held it tight, trying to focus on the beam of light that cut straight down the corridor to cell 23, the same cell, the same one from which that voice had come seconds before. My breath was catching in my chest, but I didn't realize it right away. I only noticed when I tried to swallow and nearly choked on my own air. My breath wasn't coming in full. It was as if the oxygen there was thin, contaminated by something unseen. I walked slowly, each step louder than it should have been, the sound echoing off the walls, as if the hallway were warning me I wasn't welcome there. When I stopped in front of the cell, I saw that the door was exactly as always, locked, intact, with all 3 padlocks in place. No sign of rape, no scratches, no bends out of place. That, in itself, was a problem, because somebody or something had called for help. And now, nothing. Silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't the silence that envelopes everything like an absence of sound. It was silenceful, denso, a silence that vibrated in the bones, as if the concrete around me was holding its breath along with me. I shone my light into the cell. The flashlight beam danced across the worn floor, past the old mattress propped against the wall, past the dust-covered bars, past the small, stained aluminum toilet. Everything seemed in place. Nothing out of the ordinary, no bodies, no shadows, no sounds. But the air was different. Have you ever walked into a place where the smell suddenly changes, even with the windows closed? This was it, a smell. Metallic, old, mixed with the same old cheap disinfectant, but with something else, something raw, like freshly wet iron, like when someone bleeds too close. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was my own mind. Maybe it was the lingering smell of death that never left. Maybe the smell was only in my memory, not in the air. But what couldn't be explained was the sensation. There was something there, something invisible, but present. Like walking into a room right after someone you know was there, like the warmth of a body that has just gotten out of bed. That was the feeling that someone just left there, or hasn't left yet. The flashlight beam passed through the left corner of the cell and illuminated the wall where, months before, Silver had written his last words. The marks had been painted over, but anyone familiar with concrete knows paint doesn't erase everything. The wall still bore the relief. It still bore traces, like a scar trying to look like normal skin. That was where he hanged himself. That was where the voice had come from. I approached the door and pressed my face against the side opening. I wanted to hear something, anything, a breath, a whisper. Even a drop of water would have served as an anchor to reality. But no, nothing. The cell was empty. But I swear, I was not alone. That's when the light went out. Suddenly, without warning, the beam wavered and blinked twice, as if covered by an invisible shadow. My fingers tightened, and before I could adjust the focus knob, the light returned, and for a split second I thought I saw something move. It wasn't a body, not even a whole silhouette. It was like a displacement in the air, a quick movement like heat rippling near the ground, like the air being ripped apart by something that shouldn't be there. The flashlight trembled in my hand, and then, for the first time in years, my voice failed. I tried to radio for someone, but my throat was too dry. No sound came out. The cell was empty, but he felt, in the skin, in the muscles, there was something in there, watching me, or waiting. Maybe it was just guilt, or fatigue, or all the stories we hear and bury, or maybe, just maybe, whatever was trapped in that cell never wanted to leave. I still had no answers. I still had no proof. But a silent certainty took root there, deep in the mind. The cell was waiting for me, and I didn't know if that was a warning or an invitation. I went back to my room without looking back. I closed the door, turned off the radio, and leaned against the wall as if it would keep me from collapsing. My hands were still shaking, slightly, but enough that I couldn't pretend to myself that everything was okay. I took a deep breath, once, twice, trying to steady the air in my lungs, but it felt like something was still following me, stuck to the back of my neck like invisible dust from a place that should never have been reopened. There, alone, with the patrol monitor frozen in the corner of the screen, I began to doubt myself. Did I hear what I thought I heard? Did I really see that shadow in the air? Had the silence played a trick on me? But as much as I wanted to believe it, there was something inside me that wouldn't let me. A nagging unease, as if part of what happened in that cell was now ingrained within me. So I did something I wouldn't normally do, something that went against my routine, against my professional distance. I decided to consult the archives, not the official ones. Those are clean, dry, written to make it seem like everything has an explanation. I searched for old reports, forgotten comments and notes left by departed employees. Those things the system stores, but no one ever reviews. His name was Carlos Enrique Silva, 37 years old. He was admitted for robbery and murder. 2 bodies. He showed no remorse at trial, but he seemed different when he entered the unit. He was placed in cell 23 due to overcrowding in another wing, according to the report. He remained there for a little over 4 months. The first few weeks were normal, or at least no complaints were filed, but what caught my attention was how often his name appeared in behavioral reports during his final days. Small observations. Inmate reports difficulty sleeping. Silva requests transfer. Claims to hear sounds at night, crying softly in the early morning hours. He screamed during the patrol, saying he was being suffocated. And the last note, he said he couldn't take it anymore, that no one was listening to him. My stomach turned, because that's exactly what I'd heard. That's exactly what he'd said that night. I looked back at the times on the recordings and realized that Silva's screams always occurred between 1 and 1:30 in the morning. The same time that now, weeks after his death, I heard the same thing. And the worst part, none of these incidents were taken seriously. None of them prompted a psychiatric evaluation. None of them justified a cell change. The standard response was, inmate in possible simulation. Simulation! The word hit me like a punch. He called for help, he screamed, he cried, and no one listened. Or worse, pretended not to hear. I don't know what affected me more, the chill of thinking that maybe he was actually hearing something, or the fact that he was right in saying that no one listened to him, and now I had listened. You, After years of ignoring, after years of protecting myself from the humanity inside, after years of avoiding looking the inmates in the eyes, precisely so, as not to get attached, so as not to feel it was now too late, because all it took was one night, one voice to dismantle it all. I continued searching. I found a note left in a field that usually goes unnoticed. Additional comments. It was from an old security guard in sloppy, almost scribbled handwriting. Silver says he hears someone in the cell, even when he's alone. He speaks of a voice calling out to him, as if someone were asking for help. Sometimes he screams, as if responding to someone no one else can hear. We lock the cell at night. He screams anyway. It seems he believes someone needs saving. He says, if I don't answer, he'll come to me. I closed the report. I leaned back in my chair. A shiver ran down my legs like a wrong electrical wire. Silver wasn't pretending, or at the very least, he believed with all my strength that there was someone there in the cell begging for help, and now, after he was dead, he was who was calling. Or maybe not. What if the cell itself held something? And if what Silver heard, and later I also heard, wasn't him, but the same something? Something that feeds on that, of abandonment, of ignored pain. From the suffocated silence, I thought about taking this to the coordinator. I thought about sending a report, but what would I say? That I heard a voice coming from an empty cell? That the dead prisoner was calling for help? No one would listen. No one would believe it, just like no one believed Silver. I closed everything. I turned off the monitor. I locked the drawer, and yet even with the room silent I heard, not with my ears, with my body, like a memory implanted in my skin. It helps me. 2 words, an echo, a warning, and maybe a debt. It started off lightly. The night after what I saw in the report, or rather, what felt in the report, I swore I'd ignore it. I went to the shift determined to keep my head down, to do my rounds as usual, as if nothing had happened. What I needed was routine, repetition, schedules, procedures, everything that always helped me keep my mind intact in there. But the problem with trying to forget is that it only works when the thing you want to erase doesn't decide to follow you. At 1:14 a.m., in the same wing as I passed cell 18, I heard it. Not a scream, not a call for help. It was a quieter sound, a guttural noise, something between a suppressed cry and a dry-mouthed prayer. I turned quickly, thinking it was a waking inmate. It wouldn't be the first time someone had collapsed in the middle of the night, but as I approached the cell, silence. I took 2 more steps. Cell 19, nothing. Cell 20, also nothing. But when I got close to 23, I felt it again. Not the sound, the weight. The same weight in the air. The same feeling that there was someone there. Whispers, this time. I couldn't make out what was being said, just the rhythm. As if someone were reciting something, too close to the floor, too close to the wall. A choked sound that stopped whenever I tried to pay too much attention. I walked away. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to listen. I turned my back and kept walking, as if the simple movement would push it away. But it was no use, because 3 steps later, at the exact spot where the hallway turns into the main wing, I heard it in so many words. Why didn't you listen to me before? The voice was behind me, cold, dry, masculine. I turned, slowly. The hallway was empty, the cell locked, the sound gone. This repeated itself for 2 more nights, always after midnight, always with variations of the same pattern, sounds, loose phrases, a presence in the air. And they all came from the same direction, the same cell. I started avoiding the hallway. I started changing my patrol route whenever I could. Sometimes I'd ask my tower colleague to cover the camera in that section, some excuse I'd justify. One night, one of the younger guards whispered to me, "Do you also feel the cold nearby?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Another, with more time in the company, just said, "Don't touch that cell door, that's all, never touch it." They knew, but nobody spoke, and I I couldn't think of anything else. Silver's files, the sentences, the scream, the following nights, the whispers, the guilt, the doubt, the fear. It all started to take over. I couldn't sleep well anymore. I'd wake up at home, sweating, as if I'd run a marathon. I'd dream of voices calling me names I'd never used. Sometimes I'd feel the mattress sink, as if someone were sitting there, watching me. Other times, I'd wake to the echo of the cell closing. At the unit, my appearance began to change. My face was tired and my dark circles were deep. One of the supervisors asked if I wanted to switch shifts. I refused. Ted couldn't get out of there. There was something I needed to understand. And so it was that one Friday morning at 1:26 a.m. I made the decision to return to my cell, straight ahead, without pretense, without deviating from the path. The hallway was darker than usual. 3 of the lights were out. No replacement requests had been made. The radio was muted. My badge felt lighter. My hands felt colder. I walked slowly, almost in slow motion, hearing only the sound of my boot soles hitting the burnt cement floor. When I stopped in front of the door to cell 23, my heart pounded as if it would burst from my chest. The flashlight flickered in its weakest beam. And then, nothing. No sound, no voice, no movement. Just that cold, which started at the nape of my neck and ran down my spine. A cold that didn't come from the environment, but from within. Still, I stayed. I wanted to force the silence to answer me, and then, just as I was about to turn away, the voice came back. But this time it was different. No pain, without despair, no rush. It was low, firm, whispered, almost intimate. "Now you listen." It was as if someone had spoken directly into my head. Before I could react, the door behind me closed. The sound of the locks clicking into place was louder than any alarm. I whipped around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. No officers, no inmates, no movement. The cell remained locked, but I was no longer sure if I was outside or inside. And then too felt. Something passed behind me, something subtle, like a shift in the air. Like when someone passes too close and the body recognizes their presence before the brain does. A chill ran down my neck, and the air around me grew denser, colder. The flashlight flickered, and for a second, just a second, the shadow of my own silhouette seemed wrong. An extra outline, a volume that wasn't mine, but when I turned around, had nothing. Just emptiness, the cold, and that horrible certainty. I was not alone. The cell was behind me, locked, silent, but the air remained charged, dense, still, as if every particle around me was waiting for something. My breath came in short gasps, and for the first time since entering that corridor, I felt like time was no longer moving as it should. The clock seemed motionless, or maybe it was me, trapped in something I didn't understand. I took a step forward, guided by an impulse I can't explain. It wasn't courage. It wasn't curiosity. It was something older, more instinctive, as if the place demanded it of me, as if there were a debt, a silence to be broken. As I passed the side of the cell, my eyes caught a reflection between the iron bars. The flashlight trembled in my hand, and the light bounced off the metal part of the door, creating a distorted reflection, blurry but visible. And there it was. He, the face, not shouting, not crying, not asking for help, just looking. I can't explain what I saw. It wasn't a hallucination, it wasn't a figure, it wasn't a clear image. But it was real. Real enough to make my skin crawl, real enough to make my legs feel weak for a moment. It was Silver's face, sunken eyes, unshaven beard, features marked by the pain of someone who lived more than he should have, or less than he could have. But there was no hatred there, no fear, no resentment, just sadness, a sadness that bled without needing tears, a gaze that pierced through the years, the walls, the ignored reports, the silent pleas for help. It was as if he were saying to me, "Now you understand. as if he forgave me for having passed by him so many times without seeing him, and at the same time, it was as if ask for forgiveness, for letting it grow, for not resisting, or maybe he just wanted to be heard, even if it's too late. I blinked. The reflection was gone. The cell remained locked, empty, but something had changed. I left there like someone leaving a place where they've left a part of themselves. I didn't look back. I just walked, still in silence, to the watchtower. I sat down and stayed, without saying anything until the end of the shift. The following week I requested a transfer, no formal reason. I just said I needed to move. The request was approved too, quickly, as if they had expected it, as if they had known, but I was no longer the same. I started having insomnia. I no longer slept the way I used to. My dreams were no longer neutral. They became filled with echoes, endless corridors, and doors that closed by themselves. I tried not to tell anyone, not out of shame, out of fear that saying it out loud would bring it back. But at the same time, something changed in me. In the new prison, I began to hear more, not the voices from there, but the ones from here. The lives, the internal ones we always ignore, those who speak and are not answered, those who ask for medicine and wait for hours, those who write letters that are never delivered, those who look in the mirror and don't recognize their own face. I started to notice, listening, to respond, not out of pity, not out of regret, but because somehow I understood that not all cells are made of iron. You have voices that have been imprisoned for much longer than their sentence. Allows, and perhaps the worst prison, is the one where no one notices you're screaming. I realized this too late, but there was still time to change, because after that night, after that hallway, I was never just an agent again. I was a witness of a silence that speaks, of a look that begs, of a presence that doesn't want revenge, only listening. The true silence of a prison isn't the one that echoes through the empty corridors in the wee hours. It's not the muffled sound of locked cells, nor the measured footsteps of an officer trying to maintain control. It's not the flickering light bulb, nor the crackling radio. The real silence, what really hurts, is in the screams that no one hears, in the looks that no one answers, in the stories we choose to ignore because it's easier to pretend they don't exist. I thought my job was to maintain order, ensure security, follow protocol, and for a long time, that's exactly what I did. I closed doors, shut out voices, filed away faces. I experienced as much pain as someone rushing down a hallway, head down, deaf ears, and a closed mind. But that cell, that voice, that reflection that stared back at me without hate, taught me something no amount of training could have prepared me for. Sometimes the dead don't come back for revenge. They come back as memory, like a mirror, as a last chance to be human before we harden completely. They come back to remind you that the pain is ignored, does not disappear. It just changes shape. It echoes. She haunts, she calls, and all she wants is to be heard, even if it's too late. I left that cell with a wound that no one saw, and with a truth that does not abandon me. Sometimes the dead just want their pain to serve as a warning for us living people to listen to. This kind of story isn't just meant to entertain. It pokes at us. It reminds you of voices you might have ignored, of silences that now sound different. If this video has kept you hooked, it's because, somehow, you heard what needed to be heard, and that changes everything. Now, imagine how many other people also need to feel this way. When you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment, "I listen." You help this story move forward, reach more people, open more ears, and who knows, wake up those who haven't yet realized what's around them, and stay with us, because what follows goes even deeper. The next story brings a deeper mystery, a quieter pain, and a twist that not even the narrator himself was prepared to face. Click on the next video. The voice there, maybe it's not just him calling.